US bribery bomb on Adani Group. US charges Gautam Adani in bribe plot. Adani rubbishes baseless US charges. Opposition ups the ante, demands JPC probe.
JPC की मांग हमारी है, बट हम चाहते हैं कि अदानी जी को एकदम अरेस्ट किया जाए.
Big fallout of Adani bribe gate. US Adani storm. That is our top focus on 5 Live.
The Adani Group, a powerhouse of India's multinational landscape, making huge strides abroad, faces very big challenges as global investors hesitate now following serious legal troubles, perhaps the biggest legal troubles that the Adani Group has ever faced. With allegations of bribery and fraud brought in by the Department of Justice in the United States hanging over its leadership, the Adani Group is already feeling the impact. From scrapping major bond issues to losing international contracts, for instance, in Kenya and potentially elsewhere. What does this mean now for the group's future, and can it weather the storm? Take a look at this comprehensive report.
For a group which is today one of India's largest multinational conglomerates, the doors to global fundraising may slowly be closing, at least in the short term, till legal proceedings reach closure. The US indictment of Group Chairman Gautam Adani, his nephew Sagar Adani and 6 others in cases of bribery and fraud is likely to keep international investors and lenders away from the group. The fallout has already begun. The group took a hit when it was forced to scrap a $600 million bond issue in the US as the news of the indictment broke. This brought back memories of the 20,000 crore rupee FPO the group was forced to abandon in January 2023 after the Hindenburg allegations.
Information that have been provided to us.
Kenya has also cancelled airport and power purchase deals that are said to be worth $2.5 billion with the Adani Group.
The information that have been provided to us by partner nations. I have directed agencies within the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum to immediately cancel the ongoing procurement process for JKI expansion public-private partnership transaction, as well as the recently concluded Ketrago transmission in public and immediately commence the process of onboarding alternative partners, because these are important projects.
One of the crown jewels of the group, Adani Ports, along with 2 other companies, Adani Green Energy and Adani Electricity, have seen their ratings outlook cut to negative. Ratings agency S&P says the US indictment could affect investor confidence in Adani Group entities, thereby potentially impairing their funding access and increasing their funding costs. The report adds that their cash flows could be materially affected, their funding costs could rise significantly, it could also result in non-renewal of facilities or significantly higher interest rates. S&P also says the allegations could renew questions over the group's governance practices and damage its reputation. According to the agency, Adani Group needs regular access to both equity and debt markets given its large growth plans, in addition to its regular refinancing. The impact on the stock markets was immediate on Thursday, with investors in Adani stock losing 2.28 lakh crore rupees, though several companies saw buying today. The bond markets also reflected the bearish sentiment, with prices across Adani Group companies falling sharply. The Adani companies have long-established infrastructure assets with strong fundamentals and cash flows. It says the firms currently have sufficient cash flows, adequate liquidity, and face no significant refinancing needs. As of 31st March 2024, the Adani Group had 2.41 lakh crore rupees in total debt. Of this, a little over 88,000 crore is from Indian lenders. Around 26% of the debt is from overseas lenders, while around 70,000 crore has been raised through global and domestic bonds. The Adani Group also had a cash balance of 59,791 crore rupees as on 31st March, enough for 30 months of debt payment. Meanwhile, according to Bloomberg, SEBI is looking into whether Adani Green Energy failed to properly disclose the US Justice Department's investigation into bribery allegations. The report says the fact-finding could last 2 weeks, following which SEBI will decide on a formal investigation. Bureau Report, Business Today.
And I just want to reiterate those figures you just saw on your screen because they are hugely important to what could happen next with the Adani Group. The total debt of the Adani Group stood at 2.4 lakh crore rupees as of March 2024 against 2.23 lakh crore a year ago. 2 months after, remember, the Hindenburg report was published. That was in January 2023. Will fundraising be challenging for the Adani Group from here onwards becomes the big question. Now, Adani Group debt as of March 2024, 2.4 lakh crore. March 2023, like I said, 2.23 lakh crore, 2 months after the Hindenburg report. Now, let's talk about the fundraising challenges that face the Adani Group. It has already been forced to abandon a $600 million bond issue in the US in the wake of these bribery charges by the Department of Justice in the United States. It has similarly withdrawn from a 20,000 crore FPO. This was last year after the Hindenburg allegations in 2023. Global fundraising efforts will presumably take a hit in the wake of this entire saga. It already has, as a matter of fact. Top banks, investors are likely to avoid exposure to the Adani Group because of the heat surrounding it, both from the Hindenburg report as well as the Department of Justice charges and the indictment. And fundraising in other countries could also now be difficult. Remember, contracts have been cancelled in Kenya, and there are noises being made in other countries as well. Now, the US indictment against Gautam Adani and his associates alleges that the use of secret nicknames to conceal dealings was part of the MO, the modus operandi. Adani, the central figure, was reportedly referred to as Mr. A, Numero Uno, or the big man. This was all in communications as part of evidence towards the indictment. Another key associate, who is also the CEO of Adani Power, Vineet S. Jain, was allegedly codenamed V, Snake, and Numero Uno -1. According to charges, these code names used in private communications were reportedly intended to obscure the identities of Adani and Jain while discussing their activities and facilitating bribes. Now, the code names that you've just seen right now, I've just read them all out, both Gautam Adani and Vineet S. Jain. Now, in the 48 hours since the Department of Justice indictment dropped and became public, there has been a vast number of conspiracy theories. And I just want to read some of them. We're not giving credence to any of these conspiracy theories. Some of these are wild. Some of these merit a little closer attention. But I'll just tell you what some of these theories really look like. US extraterritorial targeting. Remember that the United States sanctioned a former Bangladesh army chief in May 2024 before Sheikh Hasina's fall. That ex-army chief was sanctioned for alleged corruption in Bangladesh, not in the United States, but it was being done just before the regime change in Bangladesh. The United States had justified it, calling it strengthening democratic institutions of rule of law in Bangladesh. The Adani case, his prosecutor says, he's committed to rooting out corruption in the international marketplace. The other very familiar conspiracy theory is linked to billionaire philanthropist George Soros. Is there a link there? This particular flowchart that you see on your screen right now has gone viral. It's doing the rounds, which shows Adani's prosecutor, Breon Peace, recommended as an attorney to the US courts by Chuck Schumer in 2021. Schumer became Senate Majority Leader in 2021, said to be close to George Soros, and his son Soros donated $16 million to Schumer's PAC. So all manner of conspiracy theories have been doing the rounds about why this has happened, why Gautam Adani has specifically been selected for this particular indictment. Some of these conspiracy theories are wild. Some of them merit much more serious attention, especially when they come from serious strategic affairs analysts and experts like Brahma Chelani, one of India's most renowned. And I want to show you what he publicly put out on his social media in the form of a post. He said, and I want to read out Brahma Chelani's post because this merits closer attention. He says, the US indictment of Adani for alleged bribery in India fits with a pattern of extraterritorial targeting of chosen entities or individuals. He takes the example that I just read out of Sheikh Hasina's fall in Bangladesh. The US imposed sanctions on an ex-army chief for alleged corruption in Bangladesh. Now, while the US justified its sanctions on General Aziz Ahmed by citing a geopolitical goal, which was strengthening democratic institutions and the rule of law in Bangladesh, it has linked its charges against Adani to Adani's company having raised $175 million from US investors for a $6 billion investment in solar power project, energy projects in India. The total bribes the company paid in India, as alleged in the indictment, were higher than the comparatively paltry capital it raised in the United States. Now, I do want to say from us all here on India Today, we believe that an investigation on all fronts must be conducted in a free and fair manner if it is merited, whether it is by the SEBI, perhaps by the Supreme Court itself, to see what these charges really mean. There are reports, including on Bloomberg, to suggest that an informal inquiry has already been started by the Securities and Exchange Board of India, because no matter where things stand, if wrongdoing has happened at any level, especially bribery or corruption here in India, it must be investigated by Indian agencies. But let me bring in Brahma Chelani, strategic affairs expert and one of India's most respected, who put out this tweet today, which in my view deserves much greater attention than many of the other wild theories that have been doing the rounds. Mr. Chelani, welcome. Extraterritorial targeting of chosen entities or individuals. Why do you think that applies in this case, Mr. Chelani?
Well, first, under what law has the US charged Adani and his associates? They have been charged under the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It's a law with an extraterritorial dimension. There have been numerous cases over the years of how the US has specifically targeted foreign companies and foreign industrialists or foreign officials under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
Yeah.
Just last night, the President-elect Donald Trump, on his social media platform, referred to how the US justice system has been weaponized. The US justice system has been weaponized not just against political opponents like Trump, but also against hostile regimes that the US sees as hostile to US interests, or by targeting specific entities or individuals. The US in the past has sought to bring pressure to bear, even on allies and partner countries. So there's a long history. There's so much in American academic literature. But how the US has used its extraterritorial authority, its claimed authority to extraterritorially target and to punish individuals and entities for these geopolitical objectives. And this is not the first time that such a politically driven indictment has been issued against an Indian individual. Just recently, we had the case in the Panun case, where while an Indian investigation team was in Washington, the US unveiled an indictment against a former RAW officer. They didn't take India into confidence. In fact, the Indian team that was visiting Washington was taken by complete surprise. They had gone to Washington to share information, to share what they have found in their own probe. And they were surprised by Washington pressing charges against this ex-RAW officer. So there's a history to it. And in fact, the more fundamental thing is this, that this alleged bribery took place on Indian soil. The acts were committed on Indian soil. And the US and India are close partners. Shouldn't the US have taken the Indian government into confidence, sought the Indian government's cooperation, or sought the cooperation of the Indian legal system? Now, if the US investors were affected, which is the link in the indictment, that the US investors were affected by this alleged bribery, then the proper recourse is to move the Indian justice system. The Indian legal system is very independent. But nothing of this kind have happened.
In fact,
or take other cases that have happened recently. For example, how the US involvement in the regime change in Bangladesh took India by complete surprise. Right now, as close strategic partners, the US and India should be working closely together. But we have seen how in the twilight of Biden's presidency, especially given how his cognitive decline has become more and more apparent, some in his team have sought to work in ways that undercut this emerging informal alliance between the US and India. This alliance, informal alliance, is pivotal to equilibrium in the Indo-Pacific region.
Mr. Chelani, Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, has actually made a comment on your tweet vigorously agreeing with what you've said. And he also adds, and I wanted to, get you in on that aspect as well. He says this is sheer high-handedness and abusive use of US power. Like you've just said, Mr. Chelani, Kanwal Sibal also says, and I quote, if the US has information on acts of bribery, they should move the Indian legal system. The indictment is against an Indian national for acts committed on Indian soil. The extraterritorial jurisdiction claimed by the US violates the sovereignty of other countries. If US investors are affected, they should seek redress from Indian justice. I wanted to ask you, what is the intent of this extraterritorial targeting? In a couple of other social media posts, Kanwal Sibal also talks about how China gains in all of this. Could you touch upon both of these issues, sir?
Well, how China gains is apparent from Kenya's decision yesterday to scrap these multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Adani Group and then to seek new partners in those projects. The new partners, more likely than not, are likely to be Chinese companies, because we have to keep in mind one thing, that China has these mammoth corporate entities, all of them all state-owned and state-run, that do this infrastructure work overseas under the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
In India, we don't have those big players. The only big player in the infrastructure sector has been the Adani Group. Infrastructure projects, as you know, Shiv, are highly capital intensive. And whether we like Adani or not, I don't know the Adani Group at all, but they are playing a central role in infrastructure development, both at home in India as well as overseas. So when Kenya, for example, removes the Adani Group from its projects, there is no competing Indian corporate entity that can actually fill the vacuum in Kenya. It's more likely to be some Chinese, not one, maybe more than one Chinese entity that will come in. So this is how India is losing out to China. Or, for example, how the White House has been playing the Khalistan card on the eve of Modi's visit to the US in September for the Quad Summit, where he met with Joe Biden. On the eve of the Quad Summit, the White House hosted Khalistan militant leaders and then publicized the meeting. And at that meeting, according to what the White House publicized, senior administration and intelligence officials briefed these Khalistanis. Now, what message were they seeking to send to India? So it goes back to my original question, that are some in Biden's team, by taking advantage of the president's apparent cognitive decline, working to derail the budding US-India strategic partnership? For example, this indictment against Adani is widely seen as politically driven and will have, mark my words, will have a bearing on US-India collaboration and mutual trust unless the incoming Trump administration drops the prosecution.
Yeah.
And you forget about what we are saying here. Look at how the US media has reported these charges against Adani. For example, the New York Times, indirectly talks about this indictment having received the political go-ahead from Washington. It says that in its reporting that it's unclear how the US Department of Justice under the incoming Trump administration will, it's unclear how this Justice Department will pursue the case against Adani.
Yeah.
And it mentions that President-elect Trump has spoken against the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is at the heart of this indictment against Adani and company.
Yeah.
So there is a politically driven element. Just there was a politically driven element behind the indictment against the ex-RAW officer. We should not forget that it cannot be the work of an independent district attorney in New York. After all, in the Adani case, the FBI was involved. They were the ones who initiated the entire investigation, inquiry. Intelligence agencies probably were involved. So for a district attorney in New York to press the charges against Adani and company, he must have received the political go-ahead. And the future of this case, again, rests politically on what the new administration in Washington decides to do with respect to this case.
My final question to you, and to also quickly say that, while we talk about what the intent and the motives may be, whether China gains, the deep state, a lame duck, outgoing administration in Washington, D.C., the allegations, the charges, the indictments are very serious and will, presumably be pursued here by the Indian judicial system. As we always say here on India Today, any allegations of corruption need to be investigated thoroughly in a free and fair manner. But my final question to you, Mr. Chelani, is taking off from your last point. There is an incoming administration in Washington. Do you see anything changing with Trump coming in? Because people have raised their eyebrows over the fact that, an administration in transition, an outgoing administration, has taken these big belligerent steps, which one normally doesn't see. This is a handover process going on right now. We've seen clearance for long-range weapons in Ukraine, this indictment of Adani, which is, no small action from the United States. How do you see all of that? Is this the deep state or whatever else you would like to call it, trying to get as much possible done in the time left to it before Trump comes in?
Well, you raise a fundamental question before I answer that. Whatever the charges against Adani Group are, they clearly need to be investigated. And if they're true, then the guilty should be punished.
Yeah.
Nobody is seeking to whitewash the alleged bribery, but the bribery occurred on Indian soil. And it's incumbent on the Indian government and the Indian agencies, as well as the Indian legal system, to take this forward and investigate and also file charges if there's any evidence of bribery. Having said that, there's been a troubling trend in Washington in the twilight of Biden's presidency. And ironically, after he was forced out of the presidential race by the Democratic Party elites because of his cognitive decline, in the last 5 months, we have seen these, major developments, from the regime change in Bangladesh to playing the Khalistan card against India, to filing an indictment against the next RAW officer, and now this indictment against Adani. There seems to be a troubling element to all this, which begs the question whether the incoming Trump administration will be able to change the course. Because everybody knows that Trump and Modi enjoy a warm equation.
Yeah.
And unlike in large parts of the world, especially in Europe, the Trump victory has been widely welcomed in India. In fact, many in India see the Trump administration as as something that was much needed for the US-India relationship to regain its momentum. That momentum in the US-India ties has stalled in recent months. So reviving that momentum requires new political direction in Washington. And many hope that Trump administration will be able to do that. But unfortunately, there is one element we should not forget, which is that the deep state in the US is very strong. Yeah. And in Trump's first term, the deep state placed Trump at the receiving end. There were so many things going on against Trump that helped undermine his presidency in the first term. The Russia collusion hoax, the 2 impeachments against him. Now now Trump is saying he wants to deal with the deep state, but will he be able to deal with the deep state? Because the deep state is so powerful that they might, like in his first term, again place him at the receiving end.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that, Mr. Chelani, as a final point, because a lot of people watching this unfolding story are wondering whether Trump getting into the Oval Office is going to be some kind of a quick fix solution to all of these diplomatic irritants between India and the United States. Nothing is ever going to be that simple. We'll have to wait and watch and see how things actually unfold and play out. But thank you, as always, for helping us navigate a complicated and shape-shifting story, the newest between India and the United States. Brahma Chelani, thank you very much for speaking to us here on 5 Live. Now, the political war of words. Now, we've talked about the finances, the impact, what next for the Adani Group, and now we've also shown you the conspiracy theories. But let's never remember that the most audible, most visible aspect of this is going to be next week in Parliament, where a political war of words is escalating non-stop over the indictment of Gautam Adani. Opposition leaders have denied all allegations that their states, that is the BJD, the DMK and Congress-ruled states, were recipients of bribe money. The BJD is tight-lipped and say that they will clarify after an internal discussion. The DMK and the Congress says, we've done nothing wrong. Take a look at the latest.
The indictment of billionaire Gautam Adani by a US court has created ripples in India. Adani is facing trial in New York for not disclosing to American investors information about bribing government officials in India. At the heart of the scandal is a solar power deal between Adani Green Energy and the Solar Energy Corporation of India, or SECI, which in turn struck deals to supply power to Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Odisha, Chhattisgarh and Jammu and Kashmir. 3 out of the 4 parties that were in power in the states have reacted to charges that government officials were offered 2,029 crore rupees in bribes by the Adani company to seal the deals. Jagan Mohan Reddy was the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh when the deal to buy 7 gigawatts from SECI was struck. The US indictment alleges 1,750 crores were offered for this deal. The YSRCP has claimed there was no direct involvement with the Adani Group and clarified the agreement was between the state power distribution firm and the central government's SECI. Current Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu, the arch-rival of Jagan Reddy, is treading cautiously.
Andhra Pradesh Pratishtha brand kuda debbadine vidhanga pravartincharu. Mana ee vidhanga cheppukogalugutam అనే పరిస్థితి వస్తుంది. వాస్తవాలన్నీ వచ్చిన తర్వాత ఎప్పటికప్పుడు అవన్నీ కూడా అధ్యయనం చేసుకొని ఏం చేయాలో చేస్తూనే మళ్ళా మీకు ఇన్ఫార్మ్ చేస్తాం.
The DMK, which is in power in Tamil Nadu, dismissed allegations of bribery.
1500 மெகாவாட் மின்சாரம் கொள்முதல் செய்வதற்கான ஒப்பந்தங்கள் செய்யப்பட்டன. அதுவும் சோலார் எனர்ஜி கார்ப்பரேஷன் ஆஃப் இந்தியா லிமிடெட், மத்திய எரிசக்தி துறையினுடைய ஒரு அங்கம், அதனுடைய நிறுவனம். அதில் தான் ஒப்பந்தம் செய்யப்பட்டிருக்கிறது. ஏன்னா தமிழ்நாட்டை பொறுத்தவரை அதானி நிறுவனத்திற்கும் தமிழ்நாடு மின்சார வாரியத்திற்கும் எந்த விதமான நேரடி தொடர்பும் இல்லை.
Former Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Bhupesh Baghel blamed the previous BJP government under Raman Singh for the deal.
छत्तीसगढ़ में जितने भी अडानी को खदान मिले हैं, पावर प्लांट मिले हैं, वो सब भारतीय जनता पार्टी के शासनकाल में या तो राज्य सरकार में रमन सिंह जब मुख्यमंत्री थे तब मिला, या केंद्र सरकार में 2015 में 14 के बाद जब प्रधानमंत्री बने मोदी तब उसके बाद मिला है।
The BJD, which was in power in Odisha, has remained tight-lipped.
ये अदानी इशू पे हम अभी नहीं बोलेंगे। सुनिए सर, एक मिनट नहीं बोलेंगे भाई साहब, क्लियर नहीं हुआ है वो, जब क्लियर होगा सेकंड हाफ पे करेंगे।
With the US indictment claiming bribery in India, the big question is, will there be a probe here? An investigation can be ordered by any of the states or the central government. But so far, all have kept silent on that. Bureau Report, India Today.